Hello everybody, I figure we'll start on time. Our goal here is to make it so that at the end of the hour we run out of time, right? That we have so much to talk about that even after 1 hour we'll just not let anybody else in the room and we'll just keep on talking, and so we hope to make this a lively discussion. So my name is Charles Severance. I'm from the University of Michigan. I taught my first Coursera course in July of last year, one of the early ones, and I'm currently also reteaching that course. So I'll let our fellow panelists introduce themselves, starting with Jeremy.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. It is afternoon, isn't it?
The mic's working?
Sort of. Okay.
There you go. Probably got to get close.
I'm from the University of Edinburgh in the UK. We've put together and taught one MOOC entitled E-Learning in Digital Cultures. It's a MOOC about education and about online education. And we've enjoyed the experience, so I hope I can get some of that enthusiasm and also scholarly criticism of MOOCs and online education across today.
And my name is Jason Mock, and unlike these guys, I don't teach. I'm rather an instructional designer, and so I work with the faculty on the campus of University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign to help figure out how to construct and deliver a MOOC. And so a lot of the things that I've learned from these guys and from delivering our first few MOOCs, we've been learning from that and applying it to several other MOOCs. So we have 7 of them under our belt so far and several more on the way.
And I'm Kevin Werbach. I'm the local. I teach here at the Wharton School, which is the business school at Penn, although my background is actually in law, and I taught a Coursera course on gamification, on using game design for business, which ran last fall, and it's rerunning now. Over to you.
Yep. So basically, the idea of this, I'm fresh from a panel discussion in South by Southwest, and if you're not upbeat and punchy at South by Southwest, they just like kick you right out of Austin. So we want this to be fast-moving and fast-paced with relatively short answers and quick reflection, and then quickly we want you, the audience, to be in this, okay? Even to the point where just adding comments, right? We're not going to have you line up behind a thing and state your name and where you're from and stuff. At some point, we want this to turn into total chaos. And so we're going to start by some round robining where we might even respond to the round robins with the idea of a minute or so. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have just a round robin of favorite techniques for community building in Coursera courses. So Jeremy, go ahead and give us your first one.
Thank you. It's very difficult for me to be punchy and upbeat being from the UK. I want to talk about 3 things. I want to talk about community is extending beyond the duration of a course. So community building is about forming communities early, before the start of the course date, and strategies to maintain and support that community after the course is finished. I'd also like to extend the idea of community beyond just the student group. We've got a fantastic collection of educators and people interested in education here. And I would suggest that we can think about community not just as our students, but as our academics and Coursera as well. And thirdly and lastly, I want to talk about student content and making that upfront and involving students in the process of creating course content. And I suggest that's a good way to provide students with ownership and give them a sense of community within a MOOC.
So Jason, hit us with one of your, just one, and then we'll talk about some more depth.
So as Jeremy was mentioning, the notion of having a sense of community even before a course begins, I'm sure he'll talk about that more later, but one of the aspects that I like to focus on is how do you manage the community once the formal course experience has ended? So we'll kind of start with the end in mind, and we'll kind of work through the other elements as well. But so just one really simple idea is that once the course has ended, whatever its duration, if you're planning on offering the same course again, there's the sense that there's people who are going to definitely continue the conversation after the course has ended. But how long should they continue that conversation and before it kind of fizzles out? And then is there any way to kind of keep that energy alive when you go to offer the course a second time? So one idea, one element is to manage those audiences by actually closing and shutting down the course, giving them a week's notice or so, and strongly encouraging them to continue the conversation in the next offering. So that'll take the veterans who have completed the course and apply them into the next offering and kind of help get that critical mass of good discussions happening.
Kevin.
Well, since this is the community panel, I think why don't all of you get together with some people next to you and come up with some ideas, and we'll sit here and drink coffee for a while.
That's the constructivist.
Okay.
That's the constructivist.
Let me seriously. Let me just see who's in the audience. Can you raise your hand if you've been involved in teaching a MOOC, either as instructor or part of the course team? Okay, so that's about a 30. All right. So. General point is the students desperately want community. The challenge in this kind of environment is it's very lonely. It's lonely for the professor, and it's lonely for them if they're just sitting there in front of a computer. So the people that want to get something out of the class, they want to form community, and there are lots of different ways they can do that. I don't think that I did anything in the first session of my MOOC deliberately to create community. And by community, I mean getting the students to interact with each other. There's a bunch of things that are offered in the Coursera platform itself. The forums are a way to form community. The opportunity for meetups and study groups and so forth, that's community. Social media, that's all community. I was focused on engagement. I was focused on how to get them to participate, to engage with what I was doing, and to stick with the class, and to contribute their own content into the class, and to go beyond what I was doing. And a lot of that led to community indirectly, but I think we're still early on in figuring out different ways and innovations around actually creating community. But to answer the challenge, let me just give you one example of something that I did in my class, then we'll, I'm sure, go back around. My class is on gamification, so it's on games, so I had a little game. I said offhandedly in one of the first lectures, you'll notice behind me there's some bookcases and there's a bunch of stuff in them. I had some board games and baseball caps and slinkies and all kinds of junk in the things behind me. I said they're going to change in every video segment. So it's 5 to 7 minute segments. There's 60 plus segments in the course over 6 weeks. Something's going to change. And I didn't say anything more about that in that video. A few segments later I said, oh, by the way, there's a secret message behind me somewhere. And I didn't tell them other than that was going to happen, what it was, or how to find it, and I just let the students loose. And the students threw themselves with a passion into trying to figure out what was going on. What's the secret message? What's going on? What's moving where? Well, I won't blow the secret for any of you who are taking the class, but the level of participation that happened on the forum, just people saying, oh, I'm watching the videos just to see what's going on, it made it a little bit more fun, and it gave them something to do outside of the course material itself to connect with each other, to come up with theories on the forums and so forth. So that was one thing that I did.
So one thing that I do that I'm not sure anyone else does is I travel a lot, and so I have these things I call face-to-face office hours. So I've had them in Manila, Philippines, and Barcelona, Spain, and I just have a few free hours. I'm going to do one tomorrow afternoon at 1:30 just down the street. And like 4 to 15 people show up, and then I make a little video. And I make a little video with me and all of the 15 students that show up. And then I put that up on the class, and I say something to your fellow students. Now the interesting thing is I reuse these from semester to semester, because it's not like they say, I'm taking it this semester. And so the idea there is to meet with them, some subset face-to-face, document that face-to-face meeting, and then sort of promote that idea that says this is a real thing and it is a real person, and this real teacher talked to real students at some real point in time. So I put a lot of energy in making the virtual real. And so that's my thing.
I think that's a really important general point with all of this, that the students really want to have a sense that this is not a robot out there. And they understand you're not going to talk one-to-one with 10,000 or 50,000 or 100,000 people, but anything that makes it feel somewhat live and somewhat not pre-programmed does really create that sense. And then I think once the opportunity is there, the students jump into it.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. So, Jeremy, do you want to expand on one of your points and we can kind of react to it?
Well, if I can increase the kind of
sure.
the scholarly debate here, isn't there a sense that, and as much as I admire your what I think is really exciting and innovative about what you do in terms of going around the world and meeting these different communities, is there a sense that in some way undermines the project of Coursera, which is about accessibility? I mean, you're talking about these meetings only consisting of 15 students at a time. I mean, it's what I would describe as the Santa Claus dilemma. You know, how do you get around the world and deliver all the presents in one night? You know?
Yeah, well, it's again, I think about that. And as a matter of fact, the one thing I don't do is I don't do hang-ups or hangouts or whatever they're called, right?
I hang up about hangouts.
Because I do have a hang-up about hangouts, and so I don't do that because I feel uncomfortable when I do that. I like the real live interaction, and so I call it just sort of like closeness by proxy, right? So that there's a chance, there's a probability that you're going to meet me. Right, and the proof of the probability is that some students have met me, and again, I recycle these, and I'll have more and more of these over the years. And each week there's a little video vignette of me meeting somebody. So I agree, and it would be nice, but it's kind of it's entertaining and it's television, and not everybody gets to meet the president, but those people who do get to meet the president kind of serve as the proxy for the rest of us. So that's my theory. It's kind of like probability and proxy.
Well, I suppose that the alternative is you simply don't go out there and meet people, and those people who could potentially have met you don't get to meet you. So at least some people get that opportunity and get the chance to interact with you and bounce ideas off of you.
And I get a ton out of it because they actually don't care about the class at all. They don't want to talk about the class at all. They want to talk about Coursera and the future of education and what it means to them, and they tell me how to teach the class better. And so this goes back to teacher loneliness, right? So part of the reason I do it is because of teacher loneliness.
Yeah, no, it relates to what Jeremy said, that I mean, this panel is just framed around community. There are several different aspects to community. And I think ultimately the hardest and most important one is fostering vibrant student-to-student communities. But peer-to-peer faculty communities are also really important in this kind of environment.
So Jason, give us another of your tricks.
Well, I'll kind of dovetail on yours where you have that notion of reaching out to a select number of people, and by proxy, everyone else gets to do so. One thing that the instructors at Illinois are doing is doing the same kind of thing through the email announcements that go out each week, and we call them shout-outs. So we have a lot of discussion activity going on, and we have people monitoring those forums, trying to identify the best contributions, the most insightful, or maybe just the most intriguing, regardless of how accurate they might be. And so we bubble up to the instructor's attention a handful of those so that he can make specific reference to those people in his announcements. So it'd be the equivalent of like the president going on national TV and saying how, yeah, I really liked how Jeremy said something about it. So people get that sense that, ooh, the instructor might single me out in one capacity or another, and get energized, by that prospect, that possibility that maybe he would call on me and highlight something I did.
I follow Arnie Duncan, and probably a lot of people in this room do follow Arnie Duncan. He does that all the time, right? He shows up in some little school and makes a big fuss about, like, I love this school and I love what they're doing, and I wasn't in there and I didn't run into Arnie Duncan, but I feel like by proxy it's exactly the same kind of thing.
Yeah, I can't remember what the term is. There was when Ronald Reagan did one of his State of the Union addresses, he for the first time called. There was some individual guy who was some hero who had done something that he called on that was sitting there in the audience, and whatever that guy's last name is, anyone know what I'm talking about?
Oh, is that not? That's like Joe Beercan.
No, not right. Some guy, and his name, it's
or Joe
become
what?
An expression. Now, every State of the Union address, they have to point out to so-and-so sitting here with the First Lady, and so-and-so's, and it's called the name of that guy's last name from 1980. And it's become just a trope, and of course they still do it though because
it works.
It works. Yeah, people still feel like it personalized. I have to say, I feel a little bit uncomfortable about some of what we're saying because we're talking about is creating an illusion, and I think that's okay. And maybe this gets to Jeremy's question about Santa Claus. There's value in creating an illusion that there's more interactivity than there actually is. Because again, it's so much of it is about people's feeling about the experience, whether people really feel like it's something other than just, there's a computer out there that's reading text on a screen and you're sitting there looking at it, that it's human. There actually are other students, and there's actually a professor as a human being, and there is some level of interactivity. It's not this immutable wall between the instructor and the students. I think that's all good, and I think things that create a sense of that, like a lot of these tricks, if you will, are useful. But I think it's always important to keep in mind we're not trying to trick the students. We're actually trying to teach them. We're trying to encourage them to learn. It's there's not an answer, but I always try to think about am I doing something that I genuinely feel like I can say this is not about being on a stage and having something that's heavily produced that sort of really feels like you're actually, I'm talking to you directly, but that it genuinely feel like you're actually giving good education and good learning opportunities to the students. So just to put that out there.
So I'll follow up on something that both Jason and Jeremy said about student-created content. So one of the ways that I do student-created content is I make a mistake in the class. And so far I haven't had to force myself to make a mistake. I make enough mistakes anyways. So I'll tell you a little bit about the mistake that worked the best. So my first peer-graded assignment, I was really bad at rubrics. I had no help. I had no example. So I did some really bad rubrics, not on purpose, but it turned out great. The students basically revolted, right? They started a thing about how horrible the rubrics were. And then they sort of all kind of climb onto the anti-rubric bandwagon. And the next thing you know, a student starts saying, you know what, I'm better at making rubrics than this guy. And then that student starts a thread about their version of what the rubric should have been. And then you got a bunch of other students that pile on and edit the rubrics. And then lo and behold, the next assignment just stole her rubrics that they had collectively edited, giving a shout out just as you had done. So yes, student-created content, but also making a mistake they become like a little mob at that point, and they form to fight the man. And so in this last semester, I made the mistake of just having one really bad question on Quiz 2. And I think I'm going to just have a bad question on Quiz 2 every semester from now on, because they were sure, they tried it again, and there's this mounting sense of that this is wrong and we are taking over. And I show up 12 hours later and I'm like, you're right, I'll change it, I'll give credit for everybody. And there is a human, so making mistakes is kind of is one of my tricks, is to make mistakes. I don't do it on purpose.
Yeah, and there's something really, and there's some questions here. I think something really important in what you said that I think is generally true of the forums. My feeling about the forums was I wanted to give students the permission to take ownership of them. We're talking about community. The students need to feel like this is not just a place where, the students that are really into the class go to post, and it's not just a place where they go to post their complaints and sort of wait for some official figure. It's if they see a student making a complaint, they should respond, and they should join in, and they should answer each other. But at some point, they need to have a sense that the instructor or the course team is out there. That if it's purely a bunch of people venting and ranting and ranting and ranting, and you never come in, then it gets out of control.
Right.
So it's a balancing act. If you come in too soon, then they sort of have this sense of you're in charge and not them. And from my standpoint, I want them to be in charge. But you want them to have a sense that there's someone who cares about what's going on, who's watching and contributing and participating. And so it's a constant balancing act. But for me, at least my experience anecdotally in the class, I felt like that was really helpful, and the students valued that. They valued the permission to do things on their own, but also the sense that they weren't totally alone in this experience.
Yeah, we have somebody.
There were two.
If you're bursting in the audience, just burst, okay?
Okay, I actually am interested in community not just as one thing, but more of a nuanced thing. And you guys are getting at it in a little bit of a way. Communities can form around different things. And I know I used to lurk on Locust Walk just to try to see you when I first was in your class. But then I got over that, because then I realized what I was really looking for, to make the class more real to me were the kind of people who were taking it for the same reason that I was taking it. Yeah. And I didn't realize, I'm a librarian at Penn, and I didn't realize until after your course was over that somebody down the hall from me was in the same class. Now, I think there's a lot of different communities in there, and I don't know how you discover those, but going into that giant mosh pit of the discussion forum, I couldn't find the people that were like me, and that was a problem.
Yeah, we're not, the discussion forums are not at all there yet. And I completely agree. It is multifaceted. I mean, you may want to have a community with people at Penn, or you want to make a community with librarians, or you may want to have a community with people who, I don't know, are interested in quilting or fencing or something else that's another interest of yours, or it might be a linguistic thing. So yeah, I think that's where this needs to go. And right now, absolutely, the students don't have a lot of ability to do that other than just sort of shouting out, "I'm here," and let's what we can do.
Yeah.
Over here. So what's the opportunity to learn some things from connectivist MOOCs? So in a connectivist MOOC, you don't have to work that hard to build community because people just start connecting with each other on Twitter, and then to an earlier point I heard from Jason, you can't shut them down at the point that you want to. The conversation continues on its own, and there's probably goodness to that, right? So in institutional MOOCs like Coursera or edX, you need to draw them into the forums to do whatever needs to happen there. In a connectivist MOOC, you kind of rely on them just using Twitter and Google Docs and so forth. Well, why couldn't we just use that same concept here?
Jason.
No, I mean, I really like that. I think that one of the challenges is in working with faculty to get them to make that mental shift from, the X MOOCs to the C MOOCs, and I think that's been very difficult. I think very few have sought to take that on, and I think that we see that reflected in the Coursera list of options. They are largely the X MOOC style. But what I think we can do, and as we are discussing here today, is in general, how can we encourage as much of that community as possible? It may not be to the extent of the students are really driving the class in the way that you might see in some of the CMOOCs, but at least giving them as much opportunity as possible to form the groups and to have those discussions in the classes. I think this kind of hits on one of the simple suggestions that I have. It's probably the most obvious one that just has to be stated at some point is Facebook and Twitter and so forth. And so one of the ideas that we've implemented in all of our courses is simply to have a social networking hub, a single page in the course where we try to pull in some of the style of things from some of the connectivist MOOCs by promoting any Facebook groups that have been created. We'll create one just for the lazy in the crowd who don't want to take on that effort. We don't do anything with it. We try to stay hands off of it, but at least it's there. But then as people let us know about additional MOOCs or other spaces in which people can gather, we'll try to highlight those on this social networking hub page. We're not integrating it into the core of the class per se in the way that some of the other CMOOCs have, but at least we try to make that available for those who wish to avail themselves. Because one of the challenges that I think in the CMOOCs is there are a lot of people who don't prefer to go through that level of effort. It takes more work to interact in a CMOOC. And so I like to try to make sure that any broad range of motivations that someone might come into the course with are satisfied. So if you are satisfied in a CMOOC style, well then here's a few tools to help you along your way. But if you really just want to show up and watch some lectures, here's a tool to help you along your way. Or if you want more of your traditional university XMOOC type of situation, here are some tools to help you along your way. So I'm trying to incorporate as many different ideas as possible, but not defaulting everything to XMOOC or CMOOC.
So one of the things that worries me in my class, and I do writing in my class, and I kept thinking to be CMOOC-like, wouldn't it be cool if I had people turn their homework in on blog posts, right? And then that data would become part of the collective hive mind. And then my problem is that people will just cut and paste the blog posts of the people from last semester because obviously it was the right answer. And so, I really, my class is history of the internet, and I want to write a book about like the history of the internet because I know I have it pretty well for the U.S. centric, but like Chile has a history of the internet too, and people from Chile take my class, and like I want to write this book, but then, so I mean, the connectivist things, they seem like their goal is to make long lists of cool resources and write blog posts from time to time and tweet about it, right? And that's fine if your goal is to bid along, but if I just told them to publish their answers in a blog post, I just worry that they'll just copy. What's the answer? What am I missing?
Can I just jump in?
Yeah.
What I think this highlights is we need to move further both in terms of surfacing what the goals and the particular structures and design choices of the courses are, because people still use MOOC like it's one thing, and even within the kind of XMOOC kind of Coursera framework, there's lots of different ways to do it. The CMOOCs are a totally different paradigm. So part of it is as people get more sophisticated, both instructors and students, having a sense of this is the way this course is designed, and their choices. You can't be all things to all people at the same time. There's value in scale, and there's value in smallness, and so forth. So that's part of it, and the students having more sophistication, understanding what they want to get out of it, because it's true, it does take more effort. But I think your question is good. We need to learn from it. One other, to add on to what Jason said, one thing I did in my class was a wiki. because wikis are great because I just said to the students, all right, this is a class about gamification. I think you can create the best gamification resource on the web. Go do it. And it's a share.coursera.org wiki. I want it to be totally public, but it's available to anyone with a Coursera login. And I did the second session of the class. I just kept the wiki because they can just keep building on it. Not a substitute for CMove, not the same sort of thing, but it has that property that it's totally open and student controlled, and it's just out there in parallel with what's going on in the course, which is much more decentralized.
So in the spirit of building communities and introducing ourselves to one another, if we can say our name and where we're from and our roles, that'd be really great.
James Green, University of Maryland, and taught our first Coursera offering in January. I'm curious to what extent you meet with other faculty on campus that are also teaching Coursera, and has that been helpful, and kind of what lessons learned have you learned from that if you've done that?
I had lunch with them, but we barely talked about Coursera, but I watched their classes all the time, right? So, and I watched like Scott Clemmer's class, right? And I learned from that, and I watched all these other classes. I don't need to go meet with them because the people on our campus that are teaching MOOCs are the craziest, most busy people on our campus, and there's no time to meet with them. And when we meet, we just like have lunch and we're done, and we're all running somewhere. So yeah, I have taken great inspiration from both my colleagues at Michigan and other colleagues all over the place and steal all their best ideas, and that's wonderful to me. But no, we don't get together very much. Do you get people together?
Do we formally get people? So we're starting to now. So our Teaching and Learning Center, we've staffed up or developed the Open Learning Initiative at Penn, overarching for Coursera and related things. And then the Teaching and Learning Center is taking the initiative on trying to bring faculty together. So there's some of that starting to happen, and not just faculty, also the staff and the other kinds of people who are involved in the process. Yeah, we kind of find each other. I mean, Alf Race is here, who taught the poetry course at Penn, and I have lots of people, because I taught one of the first ones, especially at Wharton, just coming and finding me, saying, "What is this crazy thing that you did, and should I do it?" So yeah, not in any kind of intentional, formal, structured way, but it's somewhat self-selective. I mean, at this point, the people who are, it's not just that we're busy, it's that we all have kind of the same screw loose, willing to do this on top of everything else we're doing. So it happens, but I'd love to have it happen more.
Michael Rosa, CIO, Relay Graduate School of Education. How much of the community building, how much of this is just smart instructional design? So you're building a course, you're building the learning objectives, you're designing the activities in such a way that they're thoughtfully designed to help encourage community building around the learning objectives. How much of that that's necessary but not sufficient? And you find you have to, in addition to that, do more social things that may not be maybe tangential to the learning objectives, but you find are critically helpful in community building.
Well, I'd like to just say that yeah, there's a lot about everything that we're hearing here today in general about MOOCs that is good instructional design. Some of this is not new information. But what I will say as far as the community building aspect is concerned is when you have your classes on campus and they range from whatever, 30 to 300 to 3,000, there's a certain limit in terms of how communities can form there. They all come at your campus courses with some common motivation. At the very least, it's the degree or credit that they're trying to get at. But the opportunity that we have with the Coursera context is that there's people coming from every single walk of life, every single motivation, and so the communities have this opportunity to be so much more rich and diverse. They're not just all college students. They are people who are, as we've heard stories all over the case of, 85-year-olds, 18-year-olds, people who are changing careers, and so there's just a lot, I think, more. Perhaps you can call it, wisdom that can be shared from these communities with one another. So I think it's an opportunity to be leveraged, and we can leverage that through good instructional design practices, but because there is enough of a different context involved, I think we can make even more of it than maybe we have the opportunity to on a traditional campus course.
So I'll say something that will stimulate discussion, I'm sure. And that is, in terms of my on-campus classes, when I taught, the last person I ever wanted to run into was an instructional designer. I found them annoying, and they would just say, what are your learning objectives? And I'd say, I don't know, I just am a good teacher, right? And so then I started teaching in Coursera. And then I started doing things that worked to the extent that I could figure them out or borrow from my other teachers. And I've secretly been starting to look at like instructional design documentation, right? Like, oh, there's multiple modes. There's instructor to content, content to student. I'm secretly starting to look at instructional design materials. So don't tell anybody.
We're going to convert you. By the end.
Don't tell anybody. But at some point, you can go so far kind of on your natural gut instinct. And I think you can get actually pretty far if you've taught a long time and you've figured out how to do it. But I kind of want to take it to the next level. And so it's not like I want to go through a rigorous deprogramming thing with instructional designers that take you in a room for a week and force you to recant whatever. But instead, all those things that instructional designers think about are what I'm starting to think about. So I'm sort of beginning to accept the notion that there is a science out there that might actually help me be a better teacher. Maybe. Yeah. We have a... Say your name while we're getting the microphone to you.
My name is John Belanti, and I'm from Penn State. I am I was a psychotherapist and a life coach.
We need that.
And I agree with what you just said about taking it to the next level. And so because I like what you're saying and I like what's on the board, okay, the question I have is how are we doing that in this room at this time right now?
You mean improving our instructional
Building
design?
community.
Oh.
I tried. We're not. You're listening to all of us.
I don't know. I would go with something I think Jason said, and that is we want community. We're going to do it regardless, one way or the other. So as long as what we do in this room does not stop us from forming community, the default is to form community.
Actually, I'm going to give him a little bit more credit to say that, the notion of... I didn't understand what you said. I'm sorry. So when we were preparing for this, Chuck had the notion of not doing your traditional panel where we each spend 6.5 minutes giving a presentation, followed by 3 minutes of Q&A, followed by... No, he wanted to spice this up. And I don't know that we could have had this much back and forth in a community-type sense if we had done the traditional panel. So, yeah, we're not there, but I think we're trying to do that. The other thing that I think tailors onto that is, for me, when we're talking about community, yeah, we may be assuming the context of student community, but I mean, this is the instructor and designer and staff community. And one of the things that's been most beneficial to me being involved in Coursera has been the opportunity to talk with these guys on the forums, talk with some of you guys, and learn from one another. For me, we are all in this together because none of us know how to do any of this, right? I mean, this whole MOOC stuff is so new. And so we have to come together and learn from one another and try to share ideas. We're going to get it wrong half the time, but at least we're all going to get it wrong and learn from one another. So in this 50-minute segment, maybe we're rather limited, but in the Coursera effort as a whole, for me, it's been hugely rewarding, namely because of the community.
Yeah, and so this is a good moment to advertise the, whatever we call it, MOOC on MOOCs or whatever. It's not that great a course, but as a community we come together, and it's really interesting because I've been doing this almost a year now, and in the beginning I wanted Peng Wei to answer every one of my questions, okay, and I didn't feel right if Peng Wei didn't answer my questions. And then everybody got busy and they went from 4 to 16 to 32 to 70, and pretty soon I couldn't just call Peng Wei anymore, right? And then I had to sort of do this, do that, and I got to the point where I kept emailing people, and they would say, why don't you use the forum? And I was totally resistant to using the forum. But then there was this moment of tipping, and probably I think it was Jason got in there because he's really loud and mouthy and talks all the time, and he's very non-shy. But for me, all of a sudden, the forum became a more valuable way to gain information. Crowdsourcing the answers to the questions, the crowd became wiser than the experts at some point in the last 3 months for me. So if you haven't gone to the forum and joined, and if your Coursera people are saying, go in that forum and put your question in there, the answer is yes. I was very resistant until about 3 months ago, about 3 months ago. And now all of a sudden it's like the asset. I don't even bother, unless something's actually broken, to send an email to my support people anymore. I just go to Ask Jason and everybody else in the forum, because it's the quickest way for me to get an answer. So we're becoming like students in a sense, where we're asking and answering our questions each other. Go ahead and back.
Okay, so I'm also from Penn, and I taught one of the very first classes that was done really quickly. Thank you. And I actually had an experience where we experimented a little bit with graduate students. I taught the Listening to World Music class, where we wanted to model just how ordinary people would respond to music, to think about it. So we used some of our Penn graduate students. It was the middle of the summer. It was very casual. They came in shorts, and they did all this kind of stuff. So my issue really is with when the community building fails. Which is what happened is actually we got into the discussion forums, and there was a constituency of people in the class who didn't like what the graduate students did. Really? It got nastier and nastier, and it looked like eventually I had 2 women graduate TAs, right? And one of them emailed me on a Friday afternoon at about 4 o'clock. I was in the middle of teaching the class, and she said to me, "This is getting offensive and it feels very gendered," because they were complaining how they were dressed, and it was getting... And it was interesting how some students were really supporting the graduate students and saying, this is how it is in America, you have to let it be, and blah, 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 blah. But then there was this stuff, and so it became quite offensive, and the student wanted to intervene. And I was a little worried legally what we should do. So I said, just wait, let me just contact the people. Now, this is where we were right at the beginning with Coursera. I sent an email to somebody at Penn. She was in Europe. We sent an email to somebody here on campus, and within an hour, and then they contacted Stanford people. So we're dealing with like a 6-hour time difference on a Friday afternoon. And within an hour and a half, we had solved the problem. And basically, that's why you now flag bad posts in the forums, is because of what was happening. So there are these moments, but I think that it was really the thing of being part of a global community. Suddenly you realize that the rules weren't the same for everybody. So I think, on the other hand, my very first class, there was a YouTube song composed about my class, and by a group who formed a Facebook group independently. They kind of got together, somebody took initiative, they formed a group, they did a survey of everybody in the group to see why they were happy about the class, and somebody composed a song.
So you bring up a point that I had actually forgotten about. And that is, there was a lot more of that the first time I taught the class than this current time, to the point where I would say there's almost none of it the second time I taught the class. And part of it is because I think increasingly students have taken classes, and I think in the first round, in the first 10 classes, which included that world music class, which was a bold thing, right? I think that we swept up 100,000 people, right? And now we're not sweeping up 100,000 people in each one of these classes. And this also leads to me to the notion of community TAs, which is a Coursera innovation that's like awesome as awesome can be. And I'm using it this time. And they bring a culture that you don't have to enforce, right? They sort of slow that down, right? The community TAs are people who've been through my course. They bought it. They're like total fans. They're rabid supporters of the notion of Coursera, of everything. And they can sort of model the right behavior without you having to step in. The one thing that I would add, and I'll let you guys answer this too, one of the things I felt at the end of my first teaching of the class, which is cool that you reminded me of this because I'd forgotten about it, is I needed to step in earlier and just shut it down, right? You probably thought deeply about whether you should do this in free speech and whatever, but I got to the point at the end of my first class, not that I had too many problems in it, that I didn't feel bad about just like, pop, there goes a post, right? Post deleted by instructor, pop, there goes a post. The staff started doing it. And I think we learned a lot in that first few months that, you know, it's okay to sort of end those kinds of things that are completely non-productive. But we didn't know that at the beginning.
Yeah, I wouldn't be saying that it's necessarily easy. We're going to have to relearn all of the things that we learned in social media and community on the web. And it's especially hard because it's such a global, diverse population. So yeah, there's lots of good both technological and human ways to respond to those kinds of problems. But I'm glad you brought that up, Carol, because community is a scary thing, and for it to be authentic, the students have to be free to do what they want to do, and sometimes that can cause problems. So yeah, I think all of this, it will get better because we will all feel more comfortable and we will have various different responses. And again, it goes to what's the attitude you want to create. Do you want to say, look, anything goes, or do you want to say, no, here's what I consider decorum in this class, and if you're beyond the pale of that, then you're gone.
Yeah, I tended to delete them with no prejudice,
but
right? I didn't delete them and say you're horrible.
Yeah, once you create an expectation. So I mean, these are all things we're all going to have to work through.
So we have 5 minutes left. You've been having your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to Carol's point,
That's
but
part of
tie
this.
it back to the psychotherapist's point, because I think I didn't
We all
catch
need psychotherapists.
John's. With respect to what Carol said, I think, and I watched as you dealt with that, and my course started right at the end of that, and my course had 10 TAs, and two things we did that prevented that from happening. One is that we were all in the forums all the time. And so I never really had to be, except for one guy who was a real troll out of the 36,000, I never had to be difficult. We were just there, and our presence really brought the tone down.
Yeah.
That's the first thing I'd say. And I think, and we were very careful, the TAs were very careful, particularly the women, about about being circumspect and about not talking about their personal lives. And the students wanted to know personal things about all of us. So that leads me to partly responding to what John's saying. I think the first round of us, the first generation of us, are going to be type A's, screw loose, really like big personalities, like
Fearless,
you, Chuck.
no pain. No.
Yeah. I think that was necessary for the first round. But what that created was a tremendous amount of transference. I mean that almost there's a lot of transference. I felt transferred upon by the ModPo army. I felt like they had invested in me all kinds of things that they, in fact, themselves had learned. And we dealt with it. And they did that to the TAs. And in a way, that's what they were doing with Carol's people as well. I think, and that meant that there's cults of personality. There's a lot of focus on the instructor. There's, stalking them on the walk because you're the Mr. Gamification. I really just want to see you in person. That's meeting up with Chuck to make sure that he's a real person and having a cup of coffee when he's in town. I think maybe if we get to stage 2, there will be what's a non-type A? Quieter people, more modest people, people who are less big personalities, and it may be that the second generation of MOOCs will be more student-centered, more community-centered, more TA-centered, more community TA-centered, so that it's less about us, and I think John, I'd say it's a necessary first step that the crazies got started, and it's easy to cathect on us, but I think we're going to give way to our colleagues who are a little more nervous about it and more interested in listening to what students have to say and less performance and less me. I mean, I'm one of you guys doing the me, but I think it was necessary. But let's see if we can clear the path for others who are less going to create less transference.
I think that's a perfect closing summary statement of it all. Our goal when we started out 45 minutes ago was to have many questions, many hands up, and the conversation needs to continue, but we're out of time, so let's give a hand to our panelists and give a hand to our audience. And let's thank Yin Lu, our community building Coursera person. So she's the one that brought us all together to have this. So thank you.